Welcome to This is What Democracy Looks Like, a collaboration between the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunities Mobile Home Program and Rights and Democracy Vermont. We're excited to bring you this overview of government, federal, state, and local government, as well as sharing with you some important history around how the laws we have here in Vermont that protect mobile home park residents came to be. So my name is Laura Mistretta. I am a resident organizer with the CVOEO Mobile Home Program. And to kick it off, I hand it over to Dan.
Thanks, Laura. Really appreciate being here tonight. My name is Dan Fingas. I'm the Vermont State Organizing Director for Rights and Democracy. Rights and Democracy is a 5-year-old member-based organization that works on social justice, racial justice, and economic justice issues. And we're really excited to talk with the mobile home residents about what their government looks like and give them a little bit of government 101. So as we move through the slides, hopefully you can learn about the different forms of government and the people in Vermont who represent you at those levels. The first slide. Great. So we're going to cover, the 3 main levels of government: the federal delegation, our statewide elected and state legislature, and last, the local electeds. You see in this map, we break up Vermont into 14 counties, and you can probably find your county out on this map. You're going to learn that there's a lot of different layers to our government, and a lot of different people who can help you when you might need something. So we're going to start with the federal delegation, and with our highest serving officers, really the folks that get 6-year terms, the U.S. senators. We in Vermont have 2 U.S. senators, and we're actually in an interesting place because we're such a small state, only about 650,000 people in the state, but we get 2 senators, just like the state of California, the state of New York, and a lot of bigger states also have 2 senators. So we also have 2 of the most senior senators. So we have Senator Patrick Leahy, who's from Middlesex, Vermont. He was elected in 1974, so he's been in the Senate a long time. And because of that long tenure, he's actually the chair of the Appropriations Committee. And appropriations is really just a fancy way of saying how we spend the money. So almost everything the federal government does costs money, and the Appropriations Committee figures out how to appropriate that money. And so he is actually one of the most important senators in the current Senate now that we have a Democratic president. The highest Democrat in the Appropriations Committee, Senator Leahy, is now very important. He also sits on the Judiciary Committee. Our second U.S. senator is probably somebody that people have heard a lot about recently with his runs for president, and that's Senator Bernie Sanders. He's from Burlington, Vermont. He was elected to the Senate first in 2006, and he's also in charge of a pretty important committee, the Budget Committee. And so the Budget Committee, and there's a lot of talk, around the budgets, really can lay out what the overall federal budget is going to look like. And that's really important for figuring out what's going to get paid for. He's also on the Energy and Veterans Affairs committees. Vermont is also has a U.S. representative. So we're one of the states that actually has less representatives than senators. It's very strange. You have to be pretty small for that to happen. And so we only have 1 congressman, 1 U.S. representative that we send to Washington, D.C. every 2 years, and that's Peter Welch. Peter's from Norwich, Vermont. He was also elected in 2006, and he serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee. One note I'll make about Congressman Welch is his office has always been really consistently one of the best to go to if you have any constituent relations issues. You want to know about a federal issue, you want to talk to a staff member, his office has always been really responsive. So he's definitely somebody that you should look up his office number and call and talk to one of the staff members. They're always willing to help.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dan, because really the main way people can interact with the federal delegation, if I'm not mistaken, is if someone's having a problem with a federal agency or a federal program like Social Security, then the best people to go to would be our senators and representative, right?
Correct. Yeah, definitely. Social Security, if you're on Medicare, if you're older, anything to do with the federal government, they all have offices. Senator Sanders, Senator Leahy, and Congressman Walsh all have offices in Vermont, and they're able to really direct you. And they may not be able to find every answer for you in the first phone call, but they know who to call to get you the answers you need. And so that's part of their representative role. And you should definitely give them a call if you have any questions or need anything from the federal government. So statewide, we actually elect 6 statewide electeds every 2 years. The top of that, the most powerful, probably, statewide elected is the governor, and Governor Phil Scott has been our governor since 2016. He runs the state day to day and oversees the state departments. And so you may think of, there's the Department of Motor Vehicles, there's the Department of Transportation, which, plows our highways and does a lot of construction on them. There's, natural resources, like so many state departments. And he gets to appoint the people who run those departments, the secretaries and the commissioners, and then also just has oversight over them. So he's really vital to making sure the state is running well. And I think the other thing that's really powerful about his position is he actually has the power to veto state legislation. So I'm going to talk later about the state Senate and state House. They may pass things and he can veto it, and then it takes a much stronger vote from the state legislature to pass it again. So he is a very powerful position and has a lot to say about how our state runs day to day and month to month. And he was just reelected again in the 2020 elections. And then the second most powerful person in state government is Lieutenant Governor, and we have a new Lieutenant Governor, Molly Gray. She just won her first election in 2020. She presides over the state Senate, so she'll be the one. If you ever see a news report of the state Senate, she's going to be there with a gavel, calling on people and calling for votes. She's also the backup if the governor is incapacitated or resigns. And this doesn't happen very often. There are times when the governor may leave the state, or if the governor has a medical procedure, she would technically take over and be governor. But also, if the governor decided to leave the job, she would become the governor of the state, at least in the interim until another election could be called. So the 4 other statewide electeds that we elect are Secretary of State Jim Kondos. The Secretary of State runs our Vermont elections, which is a very important part of the process, making sure that we have fair elections, that everyone has access to voting and the ballot. The Secretary of State's office is where you can call if you have a question about whether you're registered to vote, whether, where you should vote, whether you can have an absentee ballot, which means get a ballot in the mail rather than having to go to vote. He's also, his department is also in charge of professional and business licenses. So if you have the kind of business, or someone has the kind of business where you need a state license, this is the place that you would call. Next up is our Attorney General, T.J. Donovan. So he's the state's lawyer. So he defends the state to lawsuits, but he also prosecutes folks for state crimes. And so, you'll actually hear later on about the role the Attorney General's office played during the mobile home law efforts in the 90s from Laura. But the Attorney General has a very important role as a top law enforcement official in the state. We also have State Treasurer Beth Pierce. The State Treasurer manages the state financial resources, our debts and our investments. I mean, pretty standard treasurer type role, where really making sure that, the way we invest as a state, the way that we're, the debt we're getting into, that we're taking care of it, and really is a crucial voice in making sure that we're solvent as a state and that we're not having money troubles in the state. The last of the statewide electeds is State Auditor Doug Hopper. The state auditor is kind of an interesting role. Not all states have this role. A lot of times kind of auditing of books and records would fall to the treasurer or some other department. But in Vermont, we have a separate state auditor whose job it is to hold the state accountable and that ensure taxpayer funds are being used responsibly. And so this may mean financial auditing, but it also might mean process auditing. So, there were calls recently to have him audit the Department of Labor for some of the information leaks and mistakes they've made. And so He's able to look over the processes of other departments and also the financial transactions of the state. So that brings us to kind of the biggest body on the state level, the state legislature. We have a bicameral legislature, which means two houses. You can think of it as two sides of the building. If you look at this beautiful picture of the state house, as you look at it, on the left side is the state assembly, and on the right side is the state senate, and they each have their own chambers, and they work together on bills. They'll pass bills separately, and then when they come together, if they both pass the same bills, then they go to the governor for signature. In the state senate, we have a 30-person state senate with a variety of different districts. Some more rural districts have one state senator. So if you live in, of course, I'm not going to think of the state, Lamoille County, I believe. If you live in Lamoille County, you'll have one state senator. If you live in Chittenden County, you have 6 state senators. And so that's a lot of difference in how many state senators you may have. There is a new law that's going to be in effect soon, where you can't have more than 3 state senators, and they're going to break up the districts a little differently. But for right now, this is how it breaks down. And the state senate is broken up into different committees like education, healthcare, energy, and technology. And those committees, senators serve on those different committees. And because there's only 30 senators, senators have to serve on multiple different committees. And so they become experts in a few different issue areas. So they may sit on education, healthcare, and energy technology. They may sit on all 3 of those committees or different committees. So the second house of the state legislature is the state assembly. Vermont has 150 state assembly members that serve 2-year terms. That's a lot for a state our size. We have some of the most direct representation of any state in the country. Vermonters vote for either 1 or 2 state assembly members based on their district. So there are some districts that it makes sense for a neighborhood or for a town to have 2 state assembly members because of their size. But a lot of folks just have 1. So I live here in Montpelier, so we actually have 2 state representatives that represent the city of Montpelier, but there are definitely places where there's only 1. And then state assembly members all take part in just 1 committee. So they might be on the healthcare committee or they might be on the education committee, but they're not on multiple committees because there's so many of them. They can really divvy up and just become experts in one part of the legislature. So we all have local government as well. So there's different names for local government in Vermont. If you live in a city, you have a city council. And that would be places like Burlington and Barrie and Montpelier, Winooski, and Rutland. And then there's also towns, and towns typically have select boards. And then there are a few other terms. I know at least one place has a board of aldermen. So it's a little different, but all of, whether you have a city council, a select board, a board of aldermen, it really just means your local government. And they have that look at local budgets. It could be your town budget, your city budget, fixing and maintaining local infrastructure and roads, setting up development and zoning and rules. And so that's a really big one, whether you're going to get a hotel down the street or whether it's going to be affordable housing, whether they're going to allow commercial or just residential and let people build houses. That's all going to be decided by your towns and city governments. And town and city governments are elected during town meeting day, which is the first Tuesday in March every year. And just so folks, in case you don't recognize it, this is Montpelier City Hall that I put a picture of. So you can, there's a lot of great little city halls and town halls that are dotting around Vermont. The last form of government that I'm going to talk about is school boards. So everybody, whether you have kids or grandkids in a school district or not, you still live in a school district. And so there is a school board that everybody who lives in that school district is allowed to vote for and elect. A lot of school boards are voted on town meeting day, but not every single one. Some dates vary slightly on when you elect your school board members. And school boards set the school budgets and policies for the district. So you might see that the school is going to have a new after-school program or a new adult education program. They're helping set some of that budget lines. They're also, they also try to figure out how much of a budget increase they might need. You'll typically see a vote on town meeting day or another day for a 2% budget increase for school boards, and it's really just to keep up with the cost of cost of how everything's rising, but they're the ones that are setting that and trying to really figure out how to best spend the school money that they're getting from the state. And that is kind of the final piece of the local government 101. It's a lot of different layers. The best advice I would give you is, if you don't know who to call for whichever layer, whatever issue you're having, just call someone. They're going to tell you who you should speak to. So if you call your city government or your town select board, or town manager, and they say, "Oh, we actually don't do that, it's the state," try calling your state representative. They're going to give you advice on who to call, and point you in the right direction. It's better to make the call and try to find out who can help you, because knowing who can help deal with the problem you may have is really important. And we in Vermont have we're a small state. I think we have a really responsive government. So when we do speak up and say something's wrong and we want to see change, it can happen. And I think Laura is going to really take you through one of the biggest ways that we saw change happen for the better in the 1990s, when it came to mobile home rent laws and the real need to help mobile home renters back in the 90s. So Laura, excited to hear about the case of rent mediation in mobile home parks.
In Vermont state law, mobile home park lot rents are legally allowed to be raised once every 12 months by park owners. If those park rents go above the consumer price index +1, which is a percentage set by the Department of Housing and Community Development every year, and is usually somewhere between 3% and 4%. If a proposed rent increase is above that percentage, then homeowners have the right to request mediation and directly negotiate the rent increase with park ownership. However, there was a time when there were no laws around rent increases in mobile home parks here in Vermont. And so park owners were able to raise rents multiple times a year. They could raise rents as much as, there was no limit, 20%, 30% at a time. And so to take us back to that time, where it starts is in 1994, the House, the Assembly that Dan described, drafted a bill that would require park owners to get approval from the state to raise lot rents above the consumer price index. And like I said, before this, there was no regulation, no state laws regulating lot rent in mobile home parks. However, the Assembly alone cannot pass a law. As Dan was mentioning, we've got the Assembly, we've got the Senate, and then we also have the governor. So in 1994, the governor of Vermont was Governor Howard Dean, and it was publicly known that he was initially opposed to this bill to require state approval for mobile home park lot rent increases. Residents who had been organizing around this issue were aware that Governor Dean was opposed to this bill and met with him in his office to share their stories with him. And this is a press clipping from March in 1994. And it says here, mobile home park residents dropped in for an unannounced visit with Governor Howard B. Dean and came away with a bill aimed at protecting them against rent increases. So people weren't really willing to just, they wanted to make sure that Governor Dean heard it from them straight, why this was so important. And at the end of their 10-minute meeting, Governor Dean pledged his administration's support to a 1-year rent increase moratorium above 5%, and that the state would study the trend of rent increases in mobile home parks. So that was a big step forward, but still that the law wasn't still quite in place yet. So shortly after meeting with Governor Dean, the House passed the bill to put a 1-year moratorium on rent increases over 5% and have the state study rent increase trends. And shortly after that, in April of 1994, the Senate passed the bill. And with the governor's support, the bill went into effect. And here another article that was published around that time with a quote from an active mobile home tenant saying, "We should not be afraid of the people we elect." So this bill although it was, it was passed, it was signed into law, but that's definitely not the end of our story. In July of 1994, park owners, they were also organized, and they organized to sue the state to prevent the law from going into effect. However, again, the Attorney General, who is the state's lawyer, represented the state of Vermont in this lawsuit and was able to successfully defend it in the Supreme Court and make sure that this law was able to continue and go into effect. But since this law, it was just a 1-year law, come 1995, there was going to be a need for a whole nother discussion around what are we going to do about mobile home park lot rents. So in March of 1995, residents continued to lobby the state, and they lobbied the state to extend this law for another year to continue to limit rent increases to 5% or below. In March of 1995, the House passed an extension of this bill. However, the Senate, there was some discussion. The Senate took some issues with the extension. And so there was discussion back and forth between the House and Senate. And ultimately, a compromise bill was passed in April of 1995. And what this compromise bill did was that it basically set up a system where if a lot rent increase was above, depending on how much the lot rent in a community was, if it was above 5% or 10%, homeowners had the right to request to challenge the rent increase. Park owners had their own committee that would work to advise with the park owner to determine whether cutting costs was possible. If they deemed it wasn't possible, or residents weren't satisfied with the result, they could then take it to mediation. And if mediation didn't satisfy residents, there was the right to take it to court. So a very complicated process was developed. And from there, they continued to refine the process through law and through continuing to update the law to what we actually have today, which is a bit more straightforward. And, so that if a rent increase is above the CPI +1, homeowners, residents, you have the right to negotiate that rent increase through mediation. The way this story is told initially makes it sound like the state legislature and the elected and the politicians did all the work, but really what the work that drove this bill, that drove this law, and the reason that mobile home residents passed the only rent control law in the state is that people for years before 1994 were talking with their neighbors about the concerns they had about rising lot rents. They were forming resident associations in their communities to band together and raise, and bring awareness to the issues they were facing. They tried to meet with park owners and park managers. Some even sued park owners for negligence. Eventually, resident associations connected with other communities across the state. They were able to collect data, share their stories, speak to the media, get the stories out to a wider public. Very importantly, share their personal stories with legislators and tell legislators why action is needed to put some laws in place. And residents got to the point even where they had hired a lobbyist to also help them navigate the legislature. But in all the research I had looked at, it was clear that it was residents sharing their stories, working together and sharing their stories directly with legislators that made the biggest impact. And so all in all, really, the reason that this law was passed is that residents had courage, were persistent, and they were organized. And those are the key ingredients, really, to making change in your community, making change, whether it's a local initiative or a statewide initiative or even a federal level law. What is really required is a healthy dose of courage, a lot of persistence, and a lot of work organizing. So that's our story for today. We just wanted to give people a taste of what, is possible when people organize. I'm sure Dan could tell many other stories from his work with Rights and Democracy about what it looks like, what's possible when people work together to make change. And so we'd love to connect with you all. And we'll include contact information at the end of this presentation.
Thanks, everybody. Remember, it's your government, they're your representatives, and you shouldn't be afraid to reach out to them, ask questions, tell them what you need and want. So if you do that, things will be better.
Definitely.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.